My daughters, will you have some pancakes? The cobblestone streets of Manhattan's financial district echoed with the sharp click of designer heels. Linda Sharon and Paige cut through the morning crowd like sharks, their navy blazers crisp, their expressions cold with entitlement. Both 20 years old, both honors students at Columbia, everyone knew them as the two girls who looked down on everyone else. Linda Sharon was aggressive, sharp-tongued, and ruthless. Paige was cynical, calculating, and always feeding Linda Sharon's worst instincts. That Tuesday morning, the sun was already bright between the towering buildings. The alley was narrow and crowded, and Linda Sharon's interview was supposed to start in exactly 12 minutes. They were walking fast, their expensive bags bouncing against their hips, breathing hard because failure was not an option for girls like them. Linda Sharon kept checking her Cartier watch as they hurried. "Paige, move faster," Linda Sharon snapped, her voice cutting through the street noise like a blade. "If I'm late to this Valenti Global interview, I'm finished. This is my entire future." She dragged Paige forward like time was hunting them both. As they reached the corner where Wall Street met the Old Market District, they saw an obstacle that made Linda Sharon's blood boil. An elderly man stood behind a small breakfast cart, his movements slow and deliberate. He was very frail, bent over his griddle, with thinning white hair and hands that trembled as he flipped pancakes. His apron was stained with years of honest work, his sweater was simple charcoal wool, and his feet moved carefully like someone who had been standing for decades. The sweet smell of batter filled the narrow space, and his voice came out gentle and tired as he called to passing customers. "Fresh pancakes. Breakfast for busy people." Linda Sharon's face twisted with disgust immediately. She stopped dead in her tracks, her designer purse swinging violently. "Are you kidding me?" she hissed to Paige. "This disgusting old man is blocking our path with his pathetic little cart." The elderly vendor looked up briefly, his weathered face kind but exhausted. He didn't recognize the danger standing in front of him. Paige laughed wickedly. "Linda, just push past him. We don't have time for street trash." But Linda Sharon's entitlement had reached its boiling point. Instead of walking around, instead of asking politely, she stepped forward with the cruelty that had been building inside her for 20 years of privilege. Without warning, she reached out and slammed her palm over the old man's eyes, covering his vision completely. "Move your disgusting cart, you useless relic," she screamed, her voice echoing off the brick walls. The 91-year-old man stumbled backward, disoriented and vulnerable, his spatula clattering to the ground. His hands reached up instinctively, trying to understand what was happening to him. "Please," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "I can't see." But Linda Sharon wasn't finished. Her face was twisted with rage and superiority, her eyes blazing with the kind of hatred that comes from never being told no. "You don't belong here," she continued shouting, her hand still pressed against his face. "This is Manhattan. This is where important people work, not where old beggars waste everyone's time." Paige stood behind her, recording with her phone and laughing like she was watching entertainment. The old man's knees began to shake. His gentle voice came out broken and confused. "Miss, please let me go. I'm just trying to work." That's when Linda Sharon made the decision that would destroy her entire world. She pulled her hand back and delivered a stinging slap across the elderly man's weathered cheek. The sound cracked through the alley like a gunshot. The 91-year-old man stumbled against his cart, his hand moving slowly to touch his face where her palm had struck. His eyes filled not with anger, but with quiet, devastating disappointment. Linda Sharon straightened her blazer, grabbed Paige's arm, and stormed away toward the gleaming Valenti Global Tower, her heels clicking with arrogant satisfaction. Behind her, Stacy Kung, billionaire patriarch, widowed father, and secret owner of the very company she was about to beg for a job, watched her disappear into the crowd, not knowing that this small act of cruelty was about to open a door that would change both their lives forever. 20 minutes later, Linda Sharon stood in the marble lobby of the most powerful firm in New York, adjusting her hair and practicing her smile, completely unaware that upstairs, In the executive boardroom, the old man she had just humiliated was sitting in a leather chair worth more than her entire wardrobe, and he was waiting for her. Subscribe to see how this unfolds and comment where you're watching from. I would love to say hello to you just to know how far our story is reaching. The moment Linda Sharon's hand connected with the old man's face, time seemed to freeze in the narrow Manhattan alley. But as she pulled back, ready to storm away in her righteous fury, disaster struck in the most ordinary way possible. Stacy Kung's trembling hand, still reeling from the shock of being struck, knocked against his mixing bowl. A single drop of pancake batter flew through the air in slow motion, landing with perfect precision on the lapel of Linda Sharon's $800 designer blazer. The tiny golden spot spread across the navy fabric like spilled blood on pristine snow. Linda Sharon's eyes went wide with horror, then narrowed into pure, venomous rage. Her perfectly manicured finger pointed at the stain like she was identifying a war criminal. "You disgusting old fool!" she shrieked, her voice reaching a pitch that made pigeons scatter from nearby fire escapes. "Do you have any idea how much this blazer costs? Do you have any concept of what you've just destroyed?" Stacy Kung looked down at his hands, then back at her, his weathered face crumpling with genuine remorse. "Miss, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean." "Sorry." Linda Sharon's laugh was sharp enough to cut glass. "Sorry doesn't pay for Armani. You pathetic excuse for a human being." She stepped closer, invading his space with the predatory confidence of someone who had never faced real consequences. Her voice dropped to a venomous whisper that somehow felt more dangerous than her screaming. "You are exactly what's wrong with this city. Useless relics like you, cluttering up the streets where actual important people need to be. You should be in a nursing home, not contaminating the financial district with your poverty." Paige doubled over with laughter behind her, still filming every cruel second. "Linda, you're destroying this old man. This is going viral for sure." Stacy Kung's eyes filled with something deeper than hurt, a profound sadness that seemed to carry the weight of decades. He reached into his apron pocket with shaking fingers and pulled out a crumpled $20 bill. "Please," he said quietly, "take this for your cleaning. It's all I have today." But Linda Sharon slapped the money out of his hand, sending it fluttering to the dirty cobblestones like a wounded bird. "Keep your charity, you fossil. The damage you've done can't be fixed with pocket change." She straightened her blazer with sharp, aggressive movements, her face twisted with disgust. "Come on, Paige. Being near this creature is making me physically ill. Some people just don't deserve to share the same air as the rest of us." As they clicked away on their designer heels, Linda Sharon called back over her shoulder with casual cruelty. "Next time, stay in whatever hole you crawled out of." Stacy Kung stood alone beside his cart, slowly bending to pick up the $20 bill from the ground, his movements careful and deliberate. He looked after the two young women disappearing into the crowd, and for just a moment, his eyes held something that wasn't quite sadness and wasn't quite anger. Something that looked almost like recognition. 23 minutes later, Linda Sharon stood in the most magnificent lobby she had ever seen. The Valenti Global Tower stretched toward the Manhattan sky like a monument to human ambition, its marble floors polished to mirror perfection, its crystal chandeliers casting rainbows across walls lined with original Picassos. She had managed to clean most of the batter stain from her blazer in the building's luxurious bathroom, but a faint discoloration remained, a reminder of her encounter with street-level humanity that made her jaw clench with residual anger. "Linda Sharon Matthews," she announced to the receptionist with practiced confidence, her voice echoing in the cavernous space. "I have a final interview with the executive board." The receptionist, a woman whose makeup was applied with surgical precision, smiled with professional warmth. "Of course, Miss Matthews. Mr. Valenti is expecting you. 42nd floor, executive suite. The elevator to your right will take you directly there." As the golden elevator doors closed around her, Linda Sharon caught her reflection in the polished metal and allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. Despite the morning's unpleasant encounter with Manhattan's less desirable elements, She looked every inch the future corporate executive. Her hair was perfect, her posture commanding, her expression radiating the kind of confidence that opened doors and commanded respect. The elevator climbed smoothly through the floors, each ding marking her ascent toward the life she had always known she deserved. At the 35th floor, she whispered her practiced opening line, "Mr. Valenti, I'm not here to ask for an opportunity. I'm here to show you what opportunity looks like." Floor 40. Floor 41. Floor 42. The doors opened onto a hallway that belonged in a palace. Rich mahogany panels lined the walls, punctuated by windows offering breathtaking views of Central Park. The carpet beneath her feet was thick enough to muffle the sound of her heels, and the air itself seemed to smell of success and old money. A secretary with silver hair and kind eyes looked up from an antique desk. "Miss Matthews? Mr. Valenti will see you now. Right through those doors." Linda Sharon smoothed her blazer one final time, lifted her chin with practiced arrogance, and pushed open the heavy wooden doors that separated her from her destiny. The executive boardroom was everything she had dreamed it would be. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Manhattan, a conference table that could seat 20, leather chairs that probably cost more than most people's cars. At the far end of the room, silhouetted against the morning light, stood a tall man in an impeccable suit. "Miss Matthews," he said, turning toward her with a smile that radiated both power and warmth. "I'm Dominic Valenti. Thank you for coming in today." Linda Sharon stepped forward with her most dazzling smile, her hand extended for what she knew would be the handshake that changed her life. "Mr. Valenti, the pleasure is entirely mine. I've been following your company's incredible success for—" Her words died in her throat. Sitting in the leather chair beside Dominic Valenti, wearing the same charcoal sweater and canvas apron from the alley, was the old man. The same weathered face, the same gentle eyes, the same trembling hands that had mixed pancake batter not 30 minutes ago. Stacy Kung looked up at her with an expression of calm recognition, as if he had been expecting her all along. The blood drained from Linda Sharon's face so quickly that she swayed on her feet. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air, but no sound emerged except a strangled whisper. "No, no, this can't be." Dominic Valenti's smile faltered as he looked between his father and the young woman who appeared to be having some kind of breakdown in his boardroom. "Miss Matthews, are you all right? You look like you've seen a ghost." Stacy Kung leaned back in his chair with the quiet dignity of a man who had spent 91 years learning about human nature. When he spoke, his voice was gentle but carried an authority that made the entire room feel smaller. "Dominic," he said calmly, "Miss Matthews and I met this morning. She made quite an impression." Linda Sharon's legs nearly gave out beneath her. She gripped the back of a nearby chair, her knuckles white with tension, her breathing shallow and rapid. The reality of her situation crashed over her like a tsunami of ice water. The homeless vagrant she had humiliated, the pathetic old man she had slapped and called a useless relic, was sitting in this boardroom like he owned it. Which she was beginning to realize with growing horror he probably did. "Father." Dominic's voice carried a note of concern. "What kind of impression?" Paige chose that exact moment to burst through the boardroom doors, her phone still in hand, her face flushed with excitement. "Linda, you will not believe the video I got of you destroying that old." She stopped mid-sentence as her eyes took in the scene. Linda Sharon frozen in terror, Dominic Valenti in his $1,000 suit looking confused, and the same elderly man from the alley sitting at the head of the conference table like a king holding court. "Oh," Paige whispered, her phone slipping from her suddenly nerveless fingers. "Oh no. Oh no 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 no." Dominic's expression shifted from confusion to understanding to cold, professional fury in the space of a heartbeat. "Security," he said quietly into his desk phone, his eyes never leaving Paige's face. "I need someone to escort a young woman from the building, immediately, and add her to our permanent restriction list." Within seconds, two men in dark suits appeared in the doorway. Paige looked around wildly, her face cycling through shock, panic, and desperate calculation. "Wait!" She pleaded, backing toward the windows. This is all a misunderstanding. We didn't know. Linda, tell them we didn't know. But Linda Sharon couldn't speak. She could barely breathe. Her entire world was collapsing around her like a house of cards in a hurricane. The security guards took Paige by her arms, gently but firmly, and began leading her toward the door. As they passed Linda Sharon, Paige grabbed her friend's wrist with desperate strength. Linda, she hissed, you have to fix this. You have to make this right. My family will disown me if they find out I got banned from Valenti Global. Do something. Then she was gone, her protests echoing down the hallway until the elevator doors cut them off completely. The silence that followed was deafening. Dominic Valenti stood with his hands clasped behind his back, his face a mask of controlled anger. Miss Matthews, he said, his voice carrying the kind of authority that could end careers with a single word. I think we need to discuss exactly what happened between you and my father this morning. Linda Sharon opened her mouth to speak, but Stacy Kung raised one weathered hand to stop her. Dominic, he said quietly, before you say anything you might regret, I want you to understand something about this young woman. He stood slowly, his movements careful but dignified, and walked around the conference table until he was standing directly in front of Linda Sharon. This close, she could see the red mark her hand had left on his cheek, could see the genuine kindness in his eyes that made her cruelty seem even more monstrous. She saw an old man struggling with a breakfast cart, Stacy Kung continued, his voice never rising above a conversational tone. She saw someone she perceived as beneath her station, someone who was inconveniencing her important schedule, and she made a choice about what kind of person she wanted to be in that moment. Linda Sharon felt tears beginning to build behind her eyes, but she forced them back. She would not cry in front of these men. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. Father, Dominic said, his jaw tight with barely controlled rage. Please tell me she didn't. She struck me, Stacy Kung said simply, called me a useless relic, told me I didn't deserve to share the same air as people like her. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Dominic's face went through several expressions before settling on something that looked like pure, professional ice. Miss Matthews, he said, his voice cutting through the air like a blade. I want you to understand something very clearly. The man you assaulted this morning is not just my father. He is the primary shareholder of Valenti Global. He built this company from nothing, starting with a single food cart 43 years ago. Every dollar that flows through this building, every decision that shapes this industry, every opportunity that exists in this city, it all flows through him. Linda Sharon's vision began to blur around the edges. She gripped the chair tighter, feeling like she might faint or vomit or both. Furthermore, Dominic continued, he is the single most respected philanthropist in New York. That little breakfast cart you found so offensive? The proceeds go directly to fund 3 orphanages in Queens. He's been running that cart every Tuesday for the past 15 years. Not because he needs the money, but because it was where he met my mother, and because it reminds him where he came from. The words hit Linda Sharon like physical blows. Each sentence made her earlier actions seem more monstrous, more irredeemably cruel. So when you struck him, Dominic's voice rose slightly. When you called him worthless, when you told him he didn't deserve to exist in your world, you weren't just attacking a helpless old man. You were attacking the very foundation of everything you claim to want to be part of. Linda Sharon finally found her voice, though it came out as a strangled whisper. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know who he was. If I had known. Stop, Stacy Kung said gently, and the single word carried more power than all of Dominic's fury. The problem, Miss Matthews, isn't that you didn't know who I was. The problem is that you knew exactly who you thought I was, and you decided that person deserved your cruelty. He moved back to his chair, settling into it with the careful movements of a man whose bones carried the weight of 9 decades. You see, he continued, I've spent my entire life watching people reveal their true character when they think no one important is watching. That's when you discover who someone really is, Not when they're trying to impress you, but when they think you don't matter. Linda Sharon felt something breaking inside her chest, something that might have been her heart or her pride or her entire sense of who she thought she was. Dominic moved toward his desk phone with purposeful strides. Security can escort you out the same way they did your friend. And I can make sure that every major firm in this city knows exactly what kind of person they'd be hiring if they took a chance on you. Wait! The word came from Stacy Kung, spoken quietly but with absolute authority. Dominic's hand froze over the phone. Son, the old man said, before we end Miss Matthews' career permanently, I think we should give her an opportunity to learn something about the value of honest work. Linda Sharon looked up sharply, hope and confusion warring in her expression. Stacy Kung smiled, not with warmth, but with something that looked almost predatory in its gentleness. Miss Matthews, he said, I'm going to offer you a choice. You can walk out of this building right now, and my son will make sure you never work in this industry again. Every door in this city will be closed to you permanently. He paused, letting the weight of that option settle over her like a shroud. Or, he continued, you can accept what I'm going to call the cart internship. 6 months working as my assistant at the breakfast cart. Every Tuesday and Thursday, 4:30 in the morning until noon. No pay. No credit toward your degree. No guarantee of employment here afterward. Linda Sharon's mouth fell open. You want me to work at a food cart? Like a common street vendor. Like a human being who understands the value of serving others. Stacy Kung corrected gently. Like someone who might learn that dignity doesn't come from what you own, but from how you treat people who can do nothing for you. Dominic stared at his father with something that looked like amazement. Dad, are you serious? After what she did to you? Stacy Kung's eyes never left Linda Sharon's face. I'm serious, but understand, Miss Matthews, this isn't kindness. This is education, and it will be the hardest 6 months of your privileged life. Linda Sharon looked around the boardroom desperately, as if the answer might be written on the mahogany walls or reflected in the crystal windows. Her entire future hung on this moment, balanced on the edge of a decision that would define who she was going to become. She started, then stopped, her voice failing her. Choose quickly, Stacy Kung said, his voice still gentle but carrying an edge of steel. Opportunities like this don't wait for people to gather their courage. The alarm screamed at 3:45 a.m., cutting through Linda Sharon's dreams like a rusty knife. For a moment, she lay in the unfamiliar darkness of the small apartment above Stacy Kung's secondary breakfast cart location in Baltimore, wondering if this was all some elaborate nightmare. The mattress beneath her was thin and lumpy, nothing like the Egyptian cotton sheets of her dormitory bed. The walls were paper-thin, and she could hear the rumble of early morning delivery trucks already moving through the streets below. She had chosen the cart internship in that Manhattan boardroom 3 days ago, her voice barely above a whisper as she accepted what felt like a sentence rather than an opportunity. Now, as she forced herself upright in the pre-dawn darkness, that choice felt like the stupidest decision of her entire life. The floorboards creaked under her feet as she stumbled toward the tiny bathroom, catching sight of herself in the cracked mirror. Her hair was a tangled mess, her skin pale without its usual layer of expensive makeup, and her eyes were rimmed with the exhaustion of someone whose body wasn't designed for manual labor. When she made her way downstairs to the cart area, she found Stacy Kung already there, moving with the quiet efficiency of someone who had been awake for hours. He wore the same charcoal sweater and canvas apron, but in the harsh fluorescent light of the prep kitchen, she could see details she had missed before. The careful way he arranged his tools, the methodical precision with which he measured ingredients, the almost meditative calm that surrounded him as he worked. "Good morning, Miss Matthews," he said without looking up from his mixing bowl. "Your apron is hanging on the hook by the door." Linda Sharon pulled on the canvas apron with clumsy fingers, the rough fabric feeling foreign against her skin. Everything about this place was alien to her. The industrial refrigerators humming in the corner, the smell of cooking oil and flour, the simple tools that looked like artifacts from another century. "What do I do?" she asked, her voice small in the echoing space. Watch, Stacy Kung replied simply. Learn. Try not to get in the way. For the next 4 hours, Linda Sharon discovered muscles she didn't know she possessed. She carried bags of flour that felt like they were filled with concrete. She scrubbed griddles until her hands were red and raw. She learned that pancake batter had to be mixed just so. Not too much, not too little. And that the difference between perfect and ruined was often a matter of seconds. By 8 a.m., when the first customers began to appear, Linda Sharon was already exhausted. Her designer jeans were stained with grease. Her manicured nails were chipped and dirty, and sweat had turned her carefully styled hair into a limp mess. But what struck her most was watching Stacy Kung interact with his customers. He knew their names, their orders, their stories. Mrs. Rodriguez came by every Tuesday for blueberry pancakes and updates on her son's college applications. Tommy, a construction worker with hands like leather gloves, always ordered a double stack and left a $5 tip even though his breakfast only cost $3.50. Morning, Mr. Stacy, Tommy said, his hard hat tucked under one arm. The usual? Of course, Tommy. How's the new job site treating you? Better than the last one. Foreman actually treats us like human beings instead of pack animals. Linda Sharon watched this exchange with growing confusion. These weren't transactions, they were relationships. Stacy Kung wasn't just serving food. He was serving dignity, respect, genuine human connection. By noon, when they finally closed the cart, Linda Sharon collapsed onto a nearby crate like her legs had given up on supporting her. Every part of her body ached, from her feet to her shoulders to muscles she couldn't even name. This is insane, she gasped, wiping sweat from her forehead with the back of her hand. How do you do this every day? How does anyone do this every day? Stacy Kung was cleaning his griddle with the same methodical precision he brought to everything else. You think honest work is beneath you, he said quietly, not looking up from his task. It's not that, Linda Sharon protested, though even as she said it, she knew it wasn't entirely true. It's just, I wasn't made for this kind of life. Weren't made for it? Stacy Kung repeated thoughtfully. What were you made for, Miss Matthews? Linda Sharon opened her mouth to answer, then stopped. Executive boardrooms? Corner offices? Power lunches and stock options and six-figure salaries? Suddenly, all of those things felt hollow, like beautiful shells with nothing living inside them. I don't know, she admitted, the words coming out smaller than she intended. Stacy Kung finally looked up from his cleaning, his weathered face gentle but serious. Then maybe that's what you're really here to learn. The next morning came even earlier, 3:30 a.m. this time, because Stacy Kung explained they needed extra prep time for the Wednesday rush. Linda Sharon's body protested every movement, her hands already developing calluses from the unfamiliar work, but she forced herself upright and downstairs to where the old man was already measuring flour. As they worked in the pre-dawn darkness, mixing batter and heating griddles, Stacy Kung began to talk in a way he hadn't before. His voice was quiet, almost conversational, as if he were sharing secrets with the empty kitchen. I came to this country in 1962, he said, his hands never pausing in their work. Dominic's mother was pregnant, and we had $17 between us. No English, no family, no connections. Just hope and stubbornness. Linda Sharon found herself listening despite her exhaustion, drawn in by something in his tone she couldn't quite identify. The first winter was the worst, he continued. We lived in a basement apartment in Queens. One room, no heat, rats the size of small dogs. Maria was 6 months pregnant and working double shifts at a laundry just to keep us fed. I picked up whatever work I could find. Construction, dishwashing, anything that would take someone who couldn't speak the language. He paused to flip a test pancake, checking its golden brown surface with the eye of someone who had made thousands of them. One night in December, Maria went into labor early. We couldn't afford the hospital, couldn't even afford a taxi to get there. I carried her 12 blocks through the snow, and when we finally got to the emergency room, they made us wait in the hallway because we couldn't prove we could pay. Linda Sharon's hands had stopped moving. She stood frozen, holding a bag of flour, as the weight of his words settled over her. That's when I understood something about dignity, Stacy Kung said, his voice still calm but carrying an edge of steel. It's not something you earn through money or status or the right clothes. It's something every person carries inside them, something that can't be bought or sold or taken away, unless you let someone convince you that you don't deserve it. He looked at her directly for the first time that morning, and Linda Sharon felt something crack open inside her chest. The nurses in that hospital looked at us the same way you looked at me in that alley, he said quietly. Like we were less than human. Like our suffering didn't matter because we didn't have the right papers or the right insurance or the right skin color. Linda Sharon set down the flour bag with shaking hands. Mr. Kung, Maria died giving birth to Dominic, he continued, as if she hadn't spoken. Complications, they said, could have been prevented if we'd had proper prenatal care. If we'd been able to afford regular doctor visits. If we'd been treated like people instead of problems. The silence that followed was deafening. Linda Sharon felt tears building behind her eyes, but this time she didn't fight them. They spilled down her cheeks as she truly understood, for the first time, what her cruelty had meant. She hadn't just insulted an old man. She had become part of a system that had cost this gentle soul the love of his life. So when you called me a useless relic, Stacy Kung said, his voice still soft but carrying the weight of decades. When you told me I didn't deserve to share your air, you weren't just attacking me. You were attacking every person who has ever been made to feel less than human because of their circumstances. Linda Sharon sank onto the same crate she had collapsed on the day before, but this time it wasn't from physical exhaustion. It was from the crushing weight of understanding who she had really been and who she had the potential to become. I'm so sorry, she whispered, the words feeling inadequate but necessary. I'm so sorry. Stacy Kung nodded slowly, then returned to his work. Sorry is a beginning, he said, but it's what you do next that matters. By the third week of her cart internship, Linda Sharon had developed a rhythm. Her hands no longer fumbled with the mixing bowls, her timing on the griddle was improving, and she had learned to anticipate Stacy Kung's needs before he asked. The work was still exhausting, but it no longer felt impossible. More importantly, she had begun to see the customers as individuals rather than interruptions. She learned that Mrs. Rodriguez's son had been accepted to Columbia, her own university, on a full scholarship. Tommy, the construction worker, was saving money to bring his elderly mother up from Puerto Rico. Sarah, a young nurse who stopped by before her hospital shifts, was working 3 jobs to pay off her student loans. These weren't abstract concepts of poverty or struggle anymore. They were real people with real stories, real dreams, real dignity that had nothing to do with their bank accounts or their zip codes. That's why, when her old friends from Columbia showed up on a Thursday morning with their phones already recording, Linda Sharon felt something she had never experienced before. Protective rage. Oh my God, squealed Jessica Hartwell, a trust fund baby whose father owned half of Connecticut. Linda, this is even more pathetic than we heard. You're actually flipping pancakes like some kind of servant, finished Madison Pierce, whose idea of hardship was when her credit card got temporarily frozen. Linda, what happened to you? Did you have some kind of nervous breakdown? They positioned themselves strategically around the cart, their phones capturing every angle, their laughter sharp and cruel. A small crowd was beginning to gather, not customers, just spectators drawn by the spectacle of privileged girls creating a scene. This is going to get 1 million views, Jessica continued, zooming in on Linda Sharon's stained apron and work-roughened hands. Linda Matthews, former Queen Bee of Columbia, reduced to manual labor. Your parents must be so proud. Linda Sharon felt the familiar burn of humiliation rising in her chest, the old instinct to lash out and defend herself. But then she caught sight of Stacy Kung, continuing to work quietly despite the disruption, his weathered face calm but sad. And something inside her snapped. Turn off the cameras, she said quietly, her voice cutting through their laughter like ice. What? Madison laughed. Linda, you can't be serious. This is comedy gold. I said turn them off. Linda Sharon's voice was stronger now, carrying an authority she didn't know she possessed. Jessica rolled her eyes. Oh, please, don't try to act all dignified now. You're working at a food cart, Linda. This is exactly the kind of fall from grace that... This man? Linda Sharon interrupted, gesturing toward Stacy Kung with a hand that wasn't shaking anymore. Built a billion-dollar empire from nothing. He's donated more money to charity than your families will ever see. He's shown more kindness to strangers in a single morning than you've shown in your entire spoiled lives. The laughter died on their lips. Jessica's phone wavered slightly. And you want to mock him? You want to turn his life's work into entertainment for your Instagram followers? Linda Sharon stepped forward, her voice rising with each word. You want to make fun of honest work, of people who get up before dawn to serve others, of the kind of dignity you wouldn't recognize if it was handed to you on a silver platter? Madison's face had gone pale. Linda, calm down. You were just being exactly who I used to be, Linda Sharon said, her voice now carrying the full weight of her transformation. Cruel, entitled, pathetic people who think suffering is funny as long as it's happening to someone else. She looked around at the gathered crowd. Tommy the construction worker, Mrs. Rodriguez with her morning blueberry pancakes, Sarah the nurse in her scrubs, and saw them watching with expressions of surprise and something that might have been respect. Get out, Linda Sharon said quietly, her eyes never leaving her former friends' faces. Get out and don't come back. And if I see that footage posted anywhere, if I hear you've disrespected this man or his customers in any way, I will make sure your trust funds can't protect you from the consequences. Jessica and Madison exchanged glances, suddenly uncertain. They had come expecting to find the same Linda Sharon they had always known. Sharp-tongued, status-obsessed, eager to join in any cruel joke. Instead, they had found someone they didn't recognize. Fine, Jessica said finally, lowering her phone. But don't think this changes anything, Linda. You're still working at a food cart. You're still beneath us now. As they walked away, their designer heels clicking on the pavement with the same arrogant rhythm Linda Sharon's once had. She felt something settle into place inside her chest. For the first time in months, maybe years, she felt proud of who she was becoming. Thank you, Stacy Kung said quietly, once the crowd had dispersed and normal service had resumed. Don't thank me, Linda Sharon replied, sliding a perfectly golden pancake onto a plate for Mrs. Rodriguez. Thank you for showing me what dignity actually looks like. The call came on a Tuesday morning in her 5th month of the internship. Linda Sharon was in the prep kitchen, mixing her 3rd batch of batter for the morning rush, when Stacy Kung's phone rang. She had learned to read his expressions over the months they had worked together, but the look that crossed his face as he answered was something she had never seen before. Fear, sharp and immediate. Yes, he said into the phone. Yes, I understand. I'll be right there. He hung up and stood motionless for a moment, his hands resting on the counter as if he needed the support to stay upright. Mr. Kung, Linda Sharon set down her mixing bowl. What's wrong? That was my doctor, he said quietly. The test results from last week. I need to go to the hospital right away. Linda Sharon felt something cold and terrible settle in her stomach. Over the past 5 months, she had watched Stacy Kung move a little more slowly, seen him pause sometimes to catch his breath, noticed the way his hands trembled more than they used to. She had told herself it was just age, just the natural process of a 91-year-old man's body wearing down. I'll drive you, she said immediately. The cart. Forget the cart. The words came out with surprising force. The customers will understand. Mrs. Rodriguez will understand. Tommy will understand. Everyone will understand because you've spent years putting their needs before your own. For a moment, Stacy Kung looked like he might argue. Then something in her expression seemed to convince him, and he nodded slowly. The drive to Johns Hopkins took 23 minutes that felt like hours. Linda Sharon gripped the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles went white, stealing glances at Stacy Kung in the passenger seat. He sat quietly, his weathered hands folded in his lap, staring out the window at the Baltimore streets he had served for so many years. "Mr. Kung," she said as they pulled into the hospital parking garage. "Whatever this is, whatever they tell you, you're not going through it alone." He turned to look at her, and she saw something in his eyes that made her chest tight with emotion. "Miss Matthews," he said quietly, "somewhere along the way, you stopped being my punishment and became my hope." The next 3 hours passed in a blur of sterile waiting rooms, hushed conversations with doctors, and medical terms that Linda Sharon didn't understand but knew were serious. Pancreatic cancer, stage 4, inoperable 3 to 6 months if they were lucky. She called Dominic from the hospital bathroom, her voice shaking as she tried to explain what was happening. By the time he arrived from New York, Linda Sharon had been sitting beside his father's hospital bed for 2 hours, holding the old man's hand and talking about anything except what they both knew was coming. "Dad," Dominic said, his voice breaking on the single syllable. "It's all right, son," Stacy Kung replied, his voice weak but still carrying that familiar calm authority. "We've had a good run, haven't we?" Linda Sharon started to stand, to give them privacy, but Stacy Kung's grip on her hand tightened slightly. "Stay," he said quietly. "You're family now, too." Over the next 2 months, Linda Sharon learned what it meant to watch someone you love fade away by inches. She moved into the apartment above the Baltimore cart full-time, taking over most of the daily operations while Stacy Kung grew weaker. Some days he could still work beside her for a few hours. Other days he could barely get out of bed. But he never stopped teaching her. Even as the cancer stole his strength, he continued to share stories, wisdom, lessons about business and life and the kind of person she could choose to become. He told her about building the first cart with his own hands, about the early years when Dominic was small and money was tight, about the day he realized he had finally achieved the American dream, not because of his wealth but because of his son's success and his own peace with the choices he had made. "The cart isn't just a business," he told her one evening as they sat in his small apartment, the Baltimore skyline glowing orange outside the window. "It's a reminder. No matter how successful you become, no matter how much power you accumulate, never forget what it feels like to serve others. Never forget that every person who comes to your window is carrying their own story, their own struggles, their own dreams." Linda Sharon nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I won't forget." "Promise me something else," Stacy Kung said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Promise me that when you take your place at Valenti Global, and you will, because you've earned it now, you'll remember that true success isn't measured by what you accumulate, but by how many lives you touch along the way." "I promise," she whispered back. Stacy Kung passed away on a Thursday morning in late November, quietly and peacefully in his sleep. Linda Sharon found him when she went to wake him for their usual 4 a.m. prep work. His face serene and his hands folded across his chest as if he had simply decided it was time to rest. The funeral was unlike anything Linda Sharon had ever experienced. The cathedral was packed with people from every walk of life, business executives in tailored suits, sitting next to construction workers in their cleanest clothes, society philanthropists sharing pews with nurses and teachers and street vendors. Everyone had a story about Stacy Kung's kindness, his generosity, his quiet dignity. When it came time for the eulogy, Dominic asked Linda Sharon to speak. She stood at the podium, looking out at the sea of faces, and realized that for the first time in her life, she had something truly important to say. "6 months ago," she began, her voice steady despite the tears in her eyes, "I was a different person. I was cruel, entitled, convinced that my worth was measured by what I owned rather than how I treated others. And then I met Stacy Kung." She paused, letting her eyes find Mrs. Rodriguez in the crowd, Tommy with his hard hat in his lap, Sarah the nurse still in her scrubs from a night shift. "He could have destroyed me for my cruelty. He could have ended my career with a single phone call. Instead, he gave me the greatest gift anyone has ever given me. He showed me how to become human." The cathedral was absolutely silent. "Stacy Kung taught me that dignity isn't something you wear or buy or inherit. It's something you give to others, especially when they can do nothing for you in return." It's getting up at 4 a.m. to serve pancakes to working people because you understand that everyone deserves to start their day feeling valued. It's remembering that behind every face is a story worthy of respect. She looked toward Dominic, sitting in the front row with tears streaming down his cheeks. He taught me that true wealth isn't about accumulating power. It's about using whatever power you have to lift others up. And he taught me that the measure of a life well lived isn't how high you climb, but how many hands you extend to help others climb with you. 3 weeks later, Linda Sharon sat in the Valenti Global boardroom for the second time in her life. But this time, she wasn't begging for a job. She was accepting her position as Vice President of Community Outreach, a role Dominic had created specifically for her. Your first project, he said, sliding a folder across the mahogany table, is expanding the breakfast cart program to 12 cities. Dad left detailed notes about how he wanted it to work. Each location funded through corporate profits. Each one employing people who need a second chance. All proceeds going to local charities. Linda Sharon opened the folder and found pages of Stacy Kung's careful handwriting, outlining his vision for turning his simple breakfast cart into a nationwide network of dignity and opportunity. But what made her tears start flowing was what she found in the break room later that day. In the corner, where a coffee machine might have been, sat Stacy Kung's original griddle from the Baltimore cart. Beside it was a simple plaque. In memory of Stacy Kung, who taught us that true success is measured not by what we achieve for ourselves, but by what we make possible for others. Linda Sharon ran her fingers over the worn surface of the griddle, remembering the feel of batter sizzling against the hot metal, the satisfaction of serving a perfect pancake to someone who needed it, the profound lesson that work is only as meaningful as the love you put into it. She thought about the young woman she had been 6 months ago. Cruel, entitled, convinced that some people mattered more than others. That person felt like a stranger now, like someone she had known in a different lifetime. Now, as she prepared to carry on Stacy Kung's legacy, she understood something that no business school had ever taught her. The most important thing you can build isn't wealth or power or status. It's character. And character is something you develop one choice at a time, one act of kindness at a time, one moment of choosing to see the humanity in others rather than their utility to you. She picked up her phone and dialed the Baltimore cart location, where Tommy had agreed to help train the new manager. Tommy, it's Linda. How are things going down there? Real good, Miss Linda. Mrs. Rodriguez stopped by this morning. Said to tell you the pancakes taste just like Mr. Stacy used to make them. Linda Sharon smiled through her tears. That's the highest compliment we could ask for. As she hung up and returned to her work. Real work, meaningful work, the kind of work that honored Stacy Kung's memory. Linda Sharon made herself a promise. Every morning, before she tackled her corporate responsibilities, she would spend an hour in the break room with the old griddle, making pancakes for the Valenti Global staff. Not because she had to, but because she wanted to remember. She wanted to remember what it felt like to serve others, to find dignity in honest work, to treat every person who walked through her door as someone worthy of respect and care. It was a small thing, maybe, but Stacy Kung had taught her that the smallest acts of kindness often create the biggest changes in the world. And every golden pancake she flipped was a promise that his legacy would live on, one breakfast at a time, one moment of human dignity at a time, forever. Subscribe to see how this story continues to impact lives around the world, and comment where you're watching from. I would love to say hello to you and know how far our message of dignity and kindness is reaching.